welcome to Beyond the Fundamentals. In this video, we're in Acts chapter 7, and we're talking about Stephen's message to the council. And I want to focus on a couple of phrases around verse 40 and 43. Now, I want to say thanks to everybody who supports the channel. You may not know this, but every time somebody watches but does not support the channel, an angel loses a fight to a demon. No, I'm just kidding. But these videos are brought to you by people who want to see this kind of content continue. So thanks to everyone who does that. If you would like to contribute, the details are in the description below for PayPal and Venmo. So thanks for that. Now, in Acts chapter 7, we have something strange here. And I want you to, I'm going to do some thinking out loud today. And I may lose some audience here because I want to explore something. I want to explore the possibility of something. And think about how we might be able to do something better. Stephen is in the middle of speaking to the council, and it's a bunch of Jews. It's the Jewish leaders. It's the leaders of Israel. And he's recounting what happened back in the wilderness approximately 1,500 years before, give or take. Now, speaking of the time frame for this, there actually is, I can't remember what it's called, but there is a documentary on the Exodus and the timing of it and how the biblical Exodus may have taken place a few hundred years earlier than what most people think, which would explain a few things. So when you get a chance, go check that out. Maybe I'll post a link to that when I can think of what the name of it is. I think I actually bought it in Amazon Prime Movies, so I'll go look it up and maybe make a post on the Facebook page, something like that. Now, as these Israelites are in the wilderness, now notice they just came out of the wilderness and there were plagues and miracles and everything else associated with them coming out of the wilderness. I mean, the rods turning into snakes and eating Pharaoh's snakes. His magicians had turned rods into snakes. All kinds of strange things had happened, turning water into blood. The frogs, the lice, I mean, all the plagues, but also the signs like leprosy and a few other things. All these things that convinced them that they should follow Moses and that this was of God. And then all of a sudden, they get out here in the wilderness, and Moses is up in the mountain. They're like, we don't know what this fool's doing up there, so we want a golden calf. So now notice this. They said unto Aaron, make us gods. Now what I want to do is think without jumping to your formulaic post hoc rationalizations for these things. Make us gods to go before us, for as this Moses, which brought us out of the land of Egypt, we wot not what has become of him. And now last week we talked about Moloch. Yea, ye took up the tabernacle of Moloch and the star of your god Remphan, figures which ye made to worship them. So you make these figures to worship them. Now think about the motivational structure behind that. I want to make something and worship it. I want to build something that I can worship. Now what is the motivation behind that? What is the impulse or the drive? What is the impulse or the drive that causes somebody to want to worship, and furthermore, that causes somebody to want to worship a thing they can make? Now, where do I go with this? Because I want to talk to you today about the tendency of mankind to worship something. And while we talk about that, I want to try to knock away your presuppositional formulaic thinking, which I would have, which would be that the reason we all worship something because we're all created. Everybody is born knowing that there's some kind of God. And the standard answer, the standard evangelical Christian answer is that everybody has the witness of creation and nature, conscience, and then revelation, which is scripture. So everybody has these three witnesses pointing them toward God, and you have to intentionally deny these things. And every society you see everywhere, you always see people who are worshiping some kind of God and have some kind of rules that are something like the Ten Commandments, So you see this replicated everywhere. Mankind wants to worship something. So there is a drive for it. And then there's that that typical Christian explanation it goes back to circularity, and basically it comes across as a post hoc rationalization. Now, what I want to do is I want to use this as an opportunity for evangelism, but it may be too deep for some folks to follow, okay? And I want to do this in the sense of extending out a bridge to people who would not consider Christianity to be true. And so what we're going to do is we're going to incorporate the four kinds of knowing, and most of the time Christianity is presented on the propositional level. Truth statements, a series of truth statements that we call the gospel. But now that we know there are four kinds of knowing, is it possible to get somebody exposed to Christianity at the non-propositional level and then bring them up? Because, like evangelism takes time with planting, watering, and sowing. And most people today, and I know not all, but most, especially intelligent, educated people today, have at least heard what the Christian gospel is. Now, maybe you can disambiguate what you think it is versus what they think they heard, and maybe there's room for that. But what I really want to explore is this concept of, is it possible to evangelize not at the propositional level, but at the procedural level, and at the perspectival level, and at the participatory level? Is it possible to do this? And I think we can use this as a bridge. What is it that constitutes a bridge to who? A bridge to atheists, evolutionists, things like that. Now, I will say on the outset, I'm not an evolutionist. All right? I do believe in science. I think evolutionism has a lot of presuppositions that come along with it, and there's a lot of consensus pressure to believe certain things that are not scientific. So I think my problem with evolution theory is that I don't think it's scientific in its capacity to explain things beyond our capacity to observe, test, and demonstrate, such as way back in the past, thousands of years in the past, those kinds of things. I think there are levels of presumptions, axioms, and propositional truth claims that have to be presumed before extrapolation of certain things can be made. And I think there's a lot of problems there. So I am going to talk about certain things with regard to atheism and evolutionism. What I think that is helpful to be able to do is to be able to understand the paradigm, and don that paradigm as like a VR headset and look through it and see society through it. Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to reach people who will not consider Christianity because they consider the propositional truth claims to be absurd. And they consider, the propositional truth claims, not only the historic propositional truth claims, but that's actually an easier pill to swallow, but some of the metaphysical truth claims, they consider those to be absurd. And so maybe I'm thinking it's helpful if we step into the paradigm and step into the shoes of the evolutionist and of the atheist. And by the way, I know that evolutionists aren't necessarily atheists. I know that. All right. There are some evolutionists who think that there was theistic evolution, things like that. Now, I'm not in that school of thought, but I know that they're out there. Okay. But what I'm trying to do is help us come up with something like a gospel for atheists or a gospel for evolutionists and create a bridge to them. Now, what Paul did in Acts chapter 17 is he created a bridge to the Athenians instead of quoting from the Old Testament like Peter did, like all the way up through Acts 7, and especially here in Acts 7. You got Peter, John, Stephen. They're all quoting from the Old Testament to prove to a bunch of people who already profess to believe the Old Testament and are familiar with it that Jesus Christ is the promised Messiah of the Old Testament. But when Paul goes and talks to a crowd of people that is completely not familiar with the Old Testament, because remember the Gentiles which have not the law, Romans 2:14, how do you relate to them? So he relates to them going all the way back to creation. And he relates to them going all the way back to, he talks about the unknown God, and he quotes some of their poets. So the approach with people who are not familiar with the Bible and do not consider it to be authoritative is very different than the approach of talking to somebody who's already very familiar with Scripture. Like if you're talking to somebody who grew up Catholic or something like that, but now they're an atheist or whatever, somebody who grew up in church and you both think the Bible is true. That's a different kind of conversation than when you're talking to somebody who thinks the Bible and Harry Potter novels are interchangeable, okay? So you have to bear these kinds of things in mind. So we're going to dawn. What I want to do is be able to relate to an evolutionist, and I think that if we can relate Christianity to an evolutionist in their paradigmatic mindset, that we might be able to create bridges to them to reconsider Christianity in a way that they haven't before. Somebody asked me recently about evangelism and tracts and things like that, and this is actually a very serious question. Especially, I've said publicly multiple times that I think there's something about salvation that we're missing, and I either don't know what it is or I'm afraid to say it, and I can't figure out which of those at the moment, but I'm thinking about it. And when I say there's something that we're missing, I mean like all of evangelical Christianity. I think we got something way wrong, but I'm not sure what that is, okay? But I do think that understanding the four kinds of knowing, that something in my gut tells me that that is going to be helpful in figuring out whatever it is that's wrong and getting it right. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at these. Why, like today, if people get fed up with God, what do? They just become atheists. Now, why wouldn't these people just become atheists? Why? They get upset with the God of Moses and Jehovah, and they're like, hey, look, Aaron, make us gods to go before us. Why would they turn toward an alternate God? And why would they, they took up the Star of their God Remphan, and why would they be motivated to make another God? Now, when we talked about Moloch and sacrificing to Moloch last week, what's missing in that kind of idolatry is the witting intentionality. And what do you mean by that, Kevin? Like, it is idolatry not on purpose. Like, I'm not intending to worship Moloch. I actually think I'm worshiping God, but I have been deceived into worshiping this system, which demands an immense sacrifice, which is not true and is not helpful and should be discarded for a variety of reasons. So there's a difference between trying to worship something true and being deceived and misled, and you just don't have good sense making, so you wind up worshiping something, that you shouldn't, versus a very intentional, like a statement, hey, I'm going to go worship this thing, like a very intentional thing about it. And I don't know of something analogous like that today. Now, the closest thing I can think of is in Christian circles, every once in a while, you get your rebellious teenager that goes through a phase, and then they want to go get a bunch of tattoos and become a Wiccan just because it makes everybody who's older than them upset with them, and it gets a bunch of attention, okay? It's like an attention-getting scam. And so we know that happens. We know that people, they turn from Christianity to something else, and there's a variety of motivations and reasons for that, but we don't have like a Christian who says, like, I'm fed up with this Jehovah guy. I'm going to go make me an idol and worship it. It's, it's not like that. You can get deceived into other things. And so it's curious to me. Why would they do this? Why would they make something else? And then why do people tend to worship things? Why has all mankind, every time you see anything from indigenous tribes all the way up to feudalism, there's always some kind of religion that goes along with it. So let's don our evolutionary VR goggles and look through their paradigm and see if there's some kind of bridge we can make to the evolutionary paradigm whereby we can present Christianity to an atheist or an evolutionist in a way that gets them to reconsider it in a different way. And maybe it'll get us to reconsider it in a different way too. So if I'm an evolutionist, there are a few theories about why people worship things and why religion exists. And you would presume that we share some kind of common ancestor with chimpanzees. They'd say that's our closest relative, and we share a common ancestor with them. And at some point in time, religion developed. Now, there's several different. There's no monolithic theory of evolution there that is comprehensive, completely exhaustive in all aspects, is what I mean. They agree on some things, but there's a difference between theories with regard to genetics, which would involve an individual, or theories with regards to groups, or as some other people would say, theories with regard to lineages as to why certain things would evolve the way they did. So an evolutionist would, or an atheist, and I'm talking about atheistic evolutionists here, because I know there's some theistic evolutionists, but so an atheist who is an evolutionist would presume that religion evolved essentially because it was adaptive. In other words, there's a reason for it. So religion is kind of expensive, if you think about it. Let's all get together and put our money into these things, and let's have ceremonies and invest in music and gold and buildings and sacrificing animals. There's a lot of effort and expense and time invested into this. So it's kind of expensive. So the thought would be that the only reason somebody would, like groups of people would evolve to start having this religion thing as part of what they do was because there was some kind of adaptivity that it afforded them. In other words, it helped them survive somehow. And so if you whittle it down, perhaps a system that teaches people to be moral and to sacrifice something now for something better later is adaptive and helps groups survive or a species survive. And because, and it could be that from an evolutionary standpoint, if you have, say, hundreds of thousands of different hunter-gatherer tribes, and then the ones that happen to be religious have some kind of religion, wound up surviving while the ones that didn't died off. And so then the ones that had religion would be comprised of people who had the propensity to be religious, and they would be having kids, and therefore either their genetics or their epigenetics would be surviving in their kids, and they would be passing along that drive and the tradition to have some kind of religion. And so there would be some kind of benefit. So what is the benefit? And so you could say that if you compare hunter-gatherer tribes, for whatever reason, the ones that had the religion survived and the ones that didn't. So what is it that religion brought that caused these people to be more adaptive? And that's the question you would ask. And it's either that or what you might call I think it's called a spandrel, if I can look it up real quick. A spandrel. And you say, what's a spandrel? Well, it comes from an architectural term. Stephen Jay Gould and one of his, I forget the other guy's name, in 1979 came up with a book where they're trying to explain certain features of evolution with spandrels. And a spandrel, like if you put let's see here. me see if I have an analogous structure. If you put something circular, let's say you're building a building, and you see I have a cup here, a cup holder here, a coaster. Say I'm building a building, but I want to put something round inside it, okay? And so I put this round thing like this maybe. Well, the round thing and the square thing don't quite match up. And so I have this space over here that is not being used. So it's just empty space. And so later on, the artists would come along, and that's called a spandrel. So the artists would come along and they would fill that empty space with all kinds of beautiful art. And so something that just happened by accident, it's almost like a non-adaptive byproduct of an evolutionary feature or function. Is what there is the analogy. So that little space in there between the circular and the square thing, it doesn't necessarily serve any function, but it's there and it's a byproduct, and so let's decorate it and make it pretty. So it could be that from an evolutionary standpoint, that the origination of religion and the tendency to worship God would be a spandrel of evolution. In other words, it is a byproduct that evolved, and it might not be adaptive. Maybe it's just there as a byproduct of something else. Okay? So if you're talking with somebody who thinks that it's a spandrel, maybe this line of approach won't work very well, but maybe it will. So this can bring us to a discussion of the future, sacrifice, and mythopoetic narratives. And any tribe or any kind of group of people in society that has a mythopoetic narrative would have something that unifies the people together, especially at the Dunbar level or below. And also, from an evolutionary standpoint, as mankind developed, you would have the discovery of the future. Now, Jordan Peterson has some interesting stuff. If you watch what he says, when he talks about Cain and Abel on his Genesis series, he talks about the future. He talks about sacrifice as possibly being a discovery of the future. And the discovery is that if I give up something, if I sacrifice something now, I can get something better later. Okay? And so right now, if I sacrifice going to college and paying for it now, perhaps I can get a good career later and have a better life because I sacrificed earlier on. Now, if I sacrifice early on and I get something for it, that's good. And then it becomes adaptive. And so it would work, the archetypes of whatever is common about the best sacrifice stories around would conglomerate themselves into an archetypal story that would convey the value of sacrifice to people, such as the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, bringing new life and direction to all people. That would be an archetypal story, a great grand sacrifice that affects a great number of many things. And of course, there would be a lot of other subsidiary stories that were archetypal in their own right to a smaller degree in smaller segments of society that are not so unified. So you have this concept of sacrifice, and the idea would be that if I sacrifice now, like we talked before, like if a chimpanzee makes a tool to get into a coconut, he does not think about the future. He does not make the sacrifice of continuing to carry that tool around so that the next time he sees a coconut and wants to eat it, he can get into it faster. No, he forgets it, and then he goes, and next time he sees a coconut, he has to make a new tool. So the concept of the future isn't there. So from an evolutionary standpoint, eventually, at some point, we discovered the future. We discovered that we can do things now that make things easier later. Well, if you extrapolate that out, you would constantly be doing things. Of course, there would be segments where that would grow out of control. And you would constantly be doing things now that would make things better later, but you might have a user interface for that. Okay? So while the concept is there and you can't articulate it well, you might confuse that understanding with the need to actually sacrifice a person or an animal to some false god. And this false god, you would presume, has some kind of effect over things. Now, what evolutionarily, from an evolutionary standpoint, what they don't realize is that these gods are basically an abstraction of what you might refer to as the future, or sowing and reaping, or everything that is known, or the Akashic record, or that kind of thing. If you whatever the basis is that we are all connected, could call that God. So when you're talking to an evolutionist or an atheist, instead of it being do you or don't you believe in God, let's talk about how we define God, okay? Everybody and everything is connected back to something. We're all connected to each other somehow. Whether if evolution is true, then we all evolved from essentially the same stuff and the same thing and the same origin. If creation is true, we were all created by the same creator. Everybody's connected somehow. There is some kind of connectedness. And maybe we don't empirically or participatorily know what that is without it being conveyed to us propositionally, and then you have to trust that propositional conveyance. But participatorily, we don't know what that is. So whatever that is, whatever it is that connects us all and goes back to our origin, whatever that is, let's call that God. Okay? If you do that, everybody would have to believe in God. Everybody would have to they wouldn't like that label. I don't like that label. Maybe I'll say that, okay, we all are connected. We all do come back to one common thing that we don't know what that is. And, okay, so you could say to an atheist, that's what I'm calling God. Or the future is an abstraction of God, or the law of sowing and reaping. Think about sowing and reaping. The future is everywhere. You can't get away from it. It's impending. It will judge you. It knows everything. You can't hide from it. The law of sowing and reaping is everywhere. It's all powerful. It's immutable. It's unchangeable. You can't get away from it. It will judge you. Okay, there's certain things that in abstract have the same qualities of God. And if you collect all of those concepts into one overarching concept and you represent it as a user interface, as this being that is watching you and you are interacting with him, that as a user interface, even from an atheistic or evolutionary standpoint, that's actually not a bad representation of that which of the collection of all the things that have been observed about our interactions with reality over time. Okay? So, yeah, I know that's an impersonal God. So I'm not trying to sell you on the idea that that's propositionally true. What I'm trying to do is get into the head of an atheist or an evolutionist. I'm trying to get us to be able to think and talk like them, so maybe we can create some bridges. So as we discover the future and we keep sacrificing to the future, at some point in time, we recognize our own mortality and we're going to die at some point. So say I'm going to die when I'm going to die when I'm 137, okay? So as 137 approaches, I would be less incentivized to sacrifice to the future because I know that I'm going to die. And I know that that time is approaching. I may not know the exact day that I'm going to die, but I know that my body is wearing out and it's only going to last so long before it gives up and I'm out of here, okay? So I can figure that out. And when you're confronted with your own mortality and you're wrestling with the future, the question of what's my incentive to continue doing helpful things, to continue sacrificing to the future, what's my incentive to do that? Well, evolutionarily, it would be helpful that your mythopoetic narrative would include an afterlife element so that you would still have an incentive to which you could sacrifice for future gain, because you don't just die here, you die. You don't just, it doesn't just end here when you die, but you actually keep going to the beyond and you're going to reap rewards over there. So that's why you should keep doing good things here, because it pays off there too. Now, even if that were false, it's still good for everybody else because the things that you leave behind are now better. And in a sense, whether or not people remember your name, people have the participatory components and elements of the better things that you left behind that are associated with you. So say you founded a school or something, and now everybody winds up being educated. You leave something behind, something in your legacy that you leave behind. And in a sense, in the minds of all other people, there is what you might call eternal life. Now, bear in mind, I'm not arguing to convince you of this. What I'm trying to do is show you these things in the sense of let's put on the glasses. Let's put on the paradigm of an evolutionist or of an atheist, and let's try to look through their eyes. And let's try to see Christianity through their eyes and look at what they see when they look at Christianity. That's what they see when they look at Christianity. They look at a system that evolved because it had some kind of adaptivity. And some of them, like Richard Dawkins, is hostile to Christianity, but not everybody is. Not all the atheists are hostile to Christianity. Some of them would say something like, Christianity helps people to live, or encourages people to live clean moral lives. I would say it helps them to do virtue signaling and become evil devils, but that's just a different opinion. But at best, it encourages people to live a clean moral life and do something good in this world that helps benefit other people around them, and that benefit can continue after they die. So even there are atheists out there who are favorably disposed toward Christianity because they think that it is a net gain for society, even if they don't agree with the propositional assertions of the user interface of it. So the user interface is this mythopoetic narrative of God and heaven and hell and an afterlife and all this stuff, and they're not so particularly concerned with whether or not the user interface is true of the mythopoetic narrative, but the function that it serves for society is of value, is of benefit. Therefore, I'm okay with it being here. And you'll even find atheists who actually go participate. I knew some when I was in Italy personally that actually go participate in church services and enjoy it because they think it is a better thing for society to have this element of society, to have this shared feeling, this solidarity with other people, singing together. And even if you don't propositionally believe these things are true, if you just see them as a user interface which unifies everybody toward a greater good, that's good enough. And everything is kind of a metaphor for something else. And so you might have a Bible study for lost people, non-Christians, and you bring these non-Christians together, and of the understanding that I am not going to try to convince you that Christianity is the propositional that I'm not going to try to convince you that you have to agree with the propositional truth claims of Christianity. But what I am going to suggest, Mr. Atheist, Mr. Evolutionist, is that as we look at the mythopoetic narrative of Christianity in the Bible, that there's a story in there, and your story is in there. And there is an affordance for your transformation in this mythopoetic narrative that can be extracted out. If you can find that in there, you can find the affordances for your own transformation in this mythopoetic narrative, in these narratives, in these stories, and in these instructions. And you can apply them to your own life to actually bring about the most beneficial transformation for yourself and for society and for everybody else in your life. And so you could almost be using the Bible in a secular way without demanding propositional, willful affirmation of creedal proposition compliance, while still practicing and participating in extracting out the useful things. If I consider myself perspectivally to be one of these characters in this mythopoetic narrative that I'm reading about, what would be mine to do in that situation? And if I extract out the principle, how does that inform me for what is mine to do right now? All right. So the proposition to them, to an atheist, would be that from your perspective, atheist, Christianity evolved with group adaptivity, evolution, because it wound up proving itself to be adaptive and causing a higher survival rate and causing societies to flourish in a better way if it's not misused. So what I'm inviting you to do is to come participate and help us extract out that which is useful without being sidetracked by forced compliance with the user interface of the mythopoetic narrative as being literally true. Now, why would I do this? You see? Why would I do this? Now, if they do that, does that mean they're saved? I would not say that. Okay? But are they maybe a little closer to considering the possibility that maybe Jesus actually can save them? And are they a little closer to the possibility of thinking that maybe some of the propositional truth claims have some validity to them? Or maybe when you expose them to Christianity in this way, they can show you something about it that you missed. Okay? In Psalm 34, verse 8, in the lower right-hand side of your screen over here, I'm going to highlight it so you can see it. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man that trusteth in him. Taste and see. There is a taste and see element to Christianity where you partake participatorily. And I'll be honest with you, I struggled with church. Church is to edify saved people. That's what it should be for, okay? So what can we do that can get participatory involvement of lost people so that they can taste and see that the Lord is good? In other words, there needs to be, I can't just bark a bunch of propositional truth claims at them. I need to give them an opportunity. I need to provide them an affordance to taste and see that the Lord is good before I demand compliance with these propositional truth claims. So I've always been a believer in confrontational evangelism. And when I say confrontational, that doesn't mean to be confrontational. What it means is you might call it episodic gospel presentation. Like there is a set time and place where you present the gospel to somebody and you give them an opportunity to believe in Jesus. And the more I think about that, the more I think that being propositionally, ideologically possessed on a spot, any moment in time, which could be a result of manipulation or pressure, might not be the best thing to do. And that maybe our evangelism could be spread out over a little bit of time. Like Paul sometimes would stop and he's like preached at the school of Terminus for like 2 or 3 years or something like that. Taught and persuaded and discussed and dialogued with people for years. And I think that there's something to that. I think there's something evangelistic about that. To evangelize without propositional truth claims is to try to get people on the bandwagon, if you will, or on the. I met a guy when I was getting out of the Army. There was a guy who worked for the Easter SEALs program who helped veterans get jobs and stuff. Maybe I should call him up, but. Anyway, he called himself an evangelist for the Easter SEALs program. His job was to generate interest in that program, generate interest in compliance and cooperation and participation with that program. That was his job. And perhaps a method of evangelism would be something participatory like this, where I can go to an atheist, speak to them in terms of their own paradigm without straw manning it, without trying to argue with them about the propositionally false things in their paradigm, but speak to them in terms of their paradigm and show the things that can be extrapolated out of my paradigm that are seen as valuable by his paradigm, and bring them together and have him meet the Christian paradigm at that level, at the things where his paradigm sees them as a value, sees them as valuable and something worth striving for and holding, and to improve one's life in this world, if not the next. Taste and see that the Lord is good. So the intent would be to, if I have 4 different kinds of knowing, now I'm going to try to evangelize not at the propositional level, because the propositional level isn't going to get them, but I'm going to invite them to participate and have perspectival interaction and participatory interaction with the Bible in a way that doesn't scare them off by trying to sneak Jesus in through propositional truth claims toward which their willful assertion compliance is required at first. Okay, maybe that's a way. Just something to think about. If Paul used alternative methods in Acts 17 to reach people who weren't familiar with the Bible, perhaps we can use our understanding of cognition and the 4 kinds of knowing to reach people at the non-propositional level. Maybe we can do that. Maybe it's possible. And I'm presenting this as something to think about, which would be when we have this session coming up Wednesday. I really hope that we can have a discussion on this, on the concept of evangelism and how we would do it in a way that does not generate ideologically possessed robots who are captive to a paradigm, but people who have a participatory element to their understanding, to their interaction with reality. In John 7, in the lower right-hand side, I'm going to this verse in John 7:17, Jesus says something else. If any man will do his will, he shall know of the doctrine, whether it be of God or whether I speak of myself. Now, God, remember, if I'm talking to an atheist, I'm going to take this God aspect and I'm going to find the common denominators with several other things that are happening, such as the law of sowing and reaping. And you might even slip up and call it karma or something like that to kind of get the idea across. The future, or all that is known. You might use some of these concepts or a collection of some of these concepts and say, if you can follow the principles that are extrapolated out of this mythopoetic narrative, you will see that it happens to be in touch with that which is the most base reality. Most base reality being interchangeable with the word God there. Okay, whatever that is, the logos, the base reality. That whatever base reality is, the book, the Bible, has indexical markers that are pointing toward, that are genuinely pointing toward that base reality. And you will, if you try to abide by what we find in Scripture, you will get a sense of knowing that you are in touch, you are in the flow of whatever base reality is that actually points you toward base reality. And so if you define the word truth as correspondence with reality, you could say that this book, the Bible, actually affords you opportunities to enhance your correspondence with reality. You see truth as an abidance or a fidelity toward that which is real, regardless of the propositions or the user interface or the indexical markers that I use to point at that thing. And when it comes to the things that are true, the Bible is a set of indexical markers pointing at a thing that is true. And that thing that it's pointing at is what we should most concern ourselves with. And I think that is something that could be shared with an atheist, if they can grasp that, if they can follow you on that, and at least be willing to try. What else do you have to lose? Would you like to be in touch with reality? So when these guys in verse 43, they're taking up the tabernacle of Moloch and the star of their god Remphan, figures which ye made to worship them. Over here on the left-hand side of the screen. There's a sense that some kind of talisman or a figure or a component of reality can be a representation of something deeper. So maybe I'm wrong about this, but I don't think when these guys worshipped idols, I don't think that they just thought they were bowing down to an inanimate object. I think that they perceived some kind of superstitious or supernatural connection between that physical item as if it was a portal to some kind of magical world that would enable them to interact with base reality at a supernatural level. And so people have the propensity to do that. And there's a desire. And the desire is to be in connection. You have to be in touch with what's real. And so then you got the concepts of happiness and meaning and responsibility. These things are all connected. And happiness, I agree with some of these psychologists like Jordan Peterson to say happiness is actually not a good thing to strive for, but meaning is a good thing to strive for. And the way to get more meaning in your life is to voluntarily take on more responsibility. Voluntarily take on more responsibility than you absolutely have to. And you start small. And the more responsibility you take on that you can take on, the more meaning you have in life. And you'll also find that your capacity to do that is directly connected with your capacity for truthfulness. Not just propositional truthfulness, though it includes that, but the truthfulness and the correspondence with reality, getting a feel for where base reality is, what it is, and whether or not you're moving in accordance with it, and you can sense it, and you can detect the direction in which it's flowing, that kind of thing. So if I take on responsibility voluntarily and I do it successfully, if I fail, then now I have more experience so that the next time I try, I'm less likely to fail. And then when I do it successfully, I get a sense of meaning. There's a sense of meaning in my life. Now, the greatest example of taking on responsibility and having meaning for the most number of people, other than the self, is Jesus Christ, who took on the responsibility of all the sin of the world upon himself. And the cost of that responsibility, because you have to take on the responsibility voluntarily, and the cost that comes with it, because responsibility brings with it its own cost. And the cost, well, it cost him his life, killed him, right? And then he rose from the dead. And the same thing would happen. The pattern happens to us, to every person, is that you take on responsibility voluntarily. It has a cost associated with it. It costs you something. Maybe it's a small responsibility and all it does is cost you a little time. Maybe it costs you some time and sweat. Maybe it costs you some money. Maybe it costs you a decade of your life. It costs you something. And that cost is something that you endure, but on the other side of enduring that cost, there is a capacity for, there's an increased capacity to generate affordances for growth and beneficial interaction. You say that Jesus granted life to anyone who would trust in him and eternal life to everyone that would trust in him. And if you take that as if it's just a mythopoetic narrative, the pattern still holds true that once you take on the responsibility and you bear the cost, and then after the cost, you now have a greater capacity to do more good for more people. So that pattern it's like an irrefutable law of the universe. That is the way things work. And even if you didn't if I was an atheist, even if you did not propositionally believe in Jesus, but you recognize that following the pattern of Jesus was the best thing you could do with your life, perhaps it would be worth trying. If any man will do his will, he shall know of the doctrine, whether it be of God. Perhaps, if that's the best thing you could do with your life to get the best outcome, if that's the pattern you should follow, even if you don't believe it's literally true, it's still worth following. If following that pattern is the thing that will get you in touch with reality, that's worth trying, even if you don't think it's propositionally true. So, Christian, could it be worthwhile to get atheists to try Christianity before we try to convince them to believe it propositionally? Try it. Believe it participatorily first. Just like a baby, your deepest form of knowledge starts at the participatory knowing. The babies can't even talk, but they participate with mom and dad. Then you start getting some kind of perspective. There's a certain time with children to where if they see this side of an object, they think you do. And you turn it around, then they see that side, they think you see that side too. And there comes a developmental stage where they start to understand that you are seeing something different than them. They start to get that perspectival awareness. And then there's procedural knowledge where they start to learn how to crawl and to walk and to get around and take things from people and give things to people and eat. And all that is fundamental in that order, building up to propositional knowledge. If we're going to start babies off and they go for a year, they go for at least usually, no, well, my baby talked when they were 9 months. I know your baby's exceptional, but typically a baby go for about a year before they start putting propositional labels on things. And even when you do put a propositional label on thing, that's data compression, and it represents, like when you say mom, if mother is 20 years old, mom represents 20 years of stuff. There's no way that one little label actually captures what mom really is. But it's a label, and it's usable, and it's scalable, and it's transmissible, and people understand what it is. And so that propositional level comes later. So when we're trying to birth people into the kingdom of God, maybe we're doing it backwards. We're starting at the propositional level and then trying to reverse engineer all the procedural and perspectival and participatory knowing backwards after we start with the propositional level. And maybe that's not a good model. Maybe that's not a good way to do things. Maybe we could try doing things at a participatory level first, just like you would with a child, and let them grow to the point where they can interact at the propositional level. And maybe when they do that, they might be teaching us by that point. And I bet you they would. And that would be very interesting to see. Now, the word doctrine there. If any man will do his will, he shall know of the doctrine, whether it be of God. Now, when most people say the word doctrine, if they're from a fundamentalist background like I am, you tend to think of propositional truth claims, things you're supposed to believe. The virgin birth, the blood atonement, the doctrines, the Trinity. That's not doctrine in the Bible, okay? That's not doctrine in the Bible. When you see the word doctrine, I want you to think more something like the Truman Doctrine or the Bush Doctrine or the Marshall Plan. What are some other ones? Anyway, it's a policy of action. It's a policy of action that is in response to something or has a trigger, or there's a certain time when you do something. And the doctrine is acting the correct way at the correct time. It's what the Greeks, the kind of wisdom they would call phronesis. It is contextually, it's that kind of wisdom, phronesis wisdom, as opposed to Sophia wisdom. It's not theoretical, overarching wisdom. It's moment by moment wisdom of knowing what is yours to do contextually at the moment and in the context in which you find yourself right then. That's phronesis. And so the doctrine, if any man will do his will, he shall know the doctrine. You will know that these kinds of actions and these policies of actions of when you do certain things, like taking on the responsibility, bearing the cost, that's a doctrine. It's something you do. It's a policy of action. You will know that is, whether it be of God, you will know that that's of God. You will know that that is in touch with base reality. That is a fundamental principle of the universe. You will know it participatorily. And nobody can take that away from you propositionally. Nobody can talk you out of that. Nobody can argue you out of that. It's just there. You know it. You've done it. It's experiential. It's embedded. Doctrine. You shall know of the policy of action, whether it be of God. These people in the wilderness wanted to make other gods. They didn't turn to atheism. They wanted to make some other god. They wanted to worship something. They wanted to devote themselves to something. There's a motivational structure. There's a drive in humanity, or in groups of people especially, to know that there needs to be some kind of commitment to something. I need to be making something better somewhere, somehow. And how do I do that? And if you are persuaded that there is an overarching theme or something that ties everything together, if you can appeal to that, that will have the most good. Okay? Say you're a farmer, and if you do something that appeals to just the beans, it might hurt the corn or the collard greens, right? But if you can find something, if there's an overarching thing that is good for all of them, that's the thing that you want to appeal to. So I don't want to just appeal to that which is good for the beans. I want to appeal to that which is good for all the things that I'm trying to do. And if you think of that which is in the best interest of all the things, that's something that you could call God as a user interface. You could use that label as a user interface for that to which you could appeal, which is best for all things. And the thing is, you don't know what that is. You can simplify it with the word God. Now remember, I'm putting on atheistic glasses here and evolutionary glasses. You could simplify it with the label God, but that still doesn't mean that you know what is in the best interest. But you also know that you can appeal to that thing because you want what's in the best interest of all the things you're taking responsibility for. And even if you don't exactly know what all those things specifically are. So this concept of appealing something that is overarchingly good for that which I'm trying to do with my life. You might think like Moloch. They might think that the best way to appeal to the overarching power that influences their lives is to sacrifice their babies to it. Now that is a mistake of taking the user interface too far from an evolutionary standpoint. Okay? Whereas you would not want to take the user interface too far and do something that costly, because maybe now you have less meaning and you're less in touch with reality, and then it depends on what your values are, things like that. So throughout history, we have examples of people trying to worship something, and it's interesting to me that these people would turn to another kind of God rather than turning to atheism, for example. And it makes me think of how an atheist would think that religions involve, including mythopoetic narratives and then the adaptability of having a religion. And maybe we can extract out that which an atheist would find useful about religion and get them to try it at those points where they meet, where there's convergence. Christianity has this participatory thing in it. What is that? To take on responsibility, bear the cost, and make things better for yourself and for other people as a result of having taken on that responsibility, and to be in better touch with reality and to have meaning in your life. An atheist wants that too. Christianity has that to offer. Can we bring an atheist to at least that component of Christianity? Can we at least get them to consider Jesus Christ, even if they don't think it's true, as at least a pattern that can help make things better? Can we get them to taste and see that God is good participatorily there first before we grow up to the point where we can use propositions? Or can we get them to at least try, if any man will do his will, he shall know of the doctrine, he shall know of the policy of action, whether it be of God, whether it be that which actually gets you in touch with base reality, correspondence with reality. Can we do that? That's the question I'm posing. And on Wednesday night, I want to talk about it. Thanks for watching. May the Lord bless you, and good day.